Hey there, it's time for another Star Trek video, and it's also time for another Star Trek video where I put in the absolute minimal amount of effort that I possibly can. You know what it is. It's not actually Trek Actually. And my favorite not actually Trek Actually videos to do because they allow me to phone it in even more than I usually do on these non-regulation, non-scripted Trek Actually videos. These are the videos of which this is one. That is how you use the English language, my friends. That is how you do that. That is a college education for you. This is one of those videos where I respond, as he finally comes to the point, to some of your comments on recent previous Trek Actually and Not Actually Trek Actually videos. It's a comment response video. It's the creative nadir of YouTube, and you have reached it on this channel, and I thank you. I thank you for coming along with me on this surely anything but scintillating ride. Hey, let's go to some of your comments. Time for a Casey Kasem segue, because these first several comments are from my recent video in memory of Erin Eisenberg, who passed away tragically a few weeks ago, and these will just be some folks who are sharing with us their favorite Nog moments, their remembrances of Nog and of Erin. So the first one comes from Orvidius Necrobones, who says, "This will always be memorable. Self-sealing stem bolts." Oh my God. Maybe my favorite inside joke that any Star Trek show ever did. And if you're a Trekkie, and especially if you're a Deep Space Nine Trekkie, you probably know what that is in reference to. There was the episode where Jake and Nog formed a company and they were trying to make profit by selling some, what was it? It started out with yamak sauce, didn't it? Didn't Quark had a bunch of extra yamak sauce that he didn't have any use for because Cardassians weren't around to buy it anymore. So they tried to sell it. They ended up trading for self-sealing stem bolts, and self-sealing stem bolts became like this brilliant in-joke about Star Trek technobabble. It's one of my favorite jokes in any Star Trek series because it has fun at the expense of one of the things that has always kind of been a little bit of a dubious trademark of Star Trek, at least since the Next Generation era, which is the sometimes over-reliance on technobabble. So they have these things called self-sealing stem bolts that sound like a very specific thing, and nobody knows what they are. Nobody knows what a self-sealing stem bolt is or what it's used for. They can't figure out who to sell them to. They can't get rid of them. They don't know what their function is. It is so funny. So yeah, self-sealing stem bolts, definitely a highlight of Nog's episodes and Nog's appearances on the show, and just one of the funniest bits I think on any Star Trek show ever. I get a huge kick out of the self-sealing stem bolt running gag. Next one is from Andrew Singleton. The best part about Nog, even as he becomes basically one of the best examples of what Starfleet can be, he still embraces and makes use of his Ferengi heritage and thinking to be uniquely himself. You're right. He is never he's never a stereotypical Ferengi. He's never like, I mean, maybe in some of the early episodes, and the episode I just mentioned with the self-sealing stem bolts where he's like sort of chasing profit. But once he gets into Starfleet, he's not really a stereotypical Ferengi anymore, but he still has that Ferengi background. He doesn't just automatically become like a human character. He still has his Ferengi instincts, his Ferengi point of view, and it informs his Starfleet career. And you see how he's actually able to take it and make it work and make it an advantage for him as a Starfleet officer. It's really, really great, and that is a fantastic example of a good Nog moment and a good example of one of the things that makes Star Trek such a wonderful franchise in general. Next one is from It's Good. One of my favorite exchanges in DS9 is when Nog hopefully asks, "So if I had to take command, people would have to call me captain?" And Miles replies, "By the time you took command, there would be no one left to call you captain." Just for the excitement in Nog's face and good humor in receiving the response. R.I.P. Erin. Yes, that's a wonderful moment too. The relationship between Nog and Chief OBrien is is really, really terrific. And yeah, O'Brien kind of just low-key shutting him down, because that's one of O'Brien's anxieties. It's one of his sort of annoyances when Nog enters the academy. And I think it's in one of the early episodes after Nog becomes a cadet. And O'Brien says, oh man, when he graduates, I'm going to have to call him Sir, because Miles is a non-commissioned officer, and after he graduates from the academy, Nog will be an ensign, a commissioned officer. He's like, oh man, I'm going to have to call him Sir. So O'Brien gets to get him back a little bit in that exchange and say, yeah, don't worry, kid. By the time anybody's calling you captain, everybody's going to be dead anyway. So nobody's ever calling you captain. Next one is from Talia Al Ghul. There was this episode where Nog was still a cadet, was being overlooked by the Klingons on DS9, and they would not take him seriously. He stood up to Martok despite his fear and got their respect. That was a good episode for him, second only to when he lost his leg in service of the Federation. Yeah, that exchange with Martok was a very popular one in the comments. A lot of people brought that up as one of their favorite Nog moments, where he finally stands up to Martok and he earns Martok's respect, and Martok says to him, you are either very brave or very stupid, little Ferengi. And Nog says, maybe I'm a little of both. and Martok says, maybe so, but don't press your luck. It's a really, really wonderful, it's a wonderful scene for both characters. It's a wonderful scene for both actors, Erin Eisenberg and also J.G. Hertzler as Martok. It's just, I mean, oh, you're going to get me started on how great Deep Space Nine is, and this is going to be like a 90-minute video. Next comment is from Timbala the Spider Monkey. Not the best Nog moment, but the one that I always liked was in Rocks and Shoals when he tells Garrick the reason he's walking behind him is he'll never turn his back on him again. R.I.P. Aaron, far too young. Yeah, that's a great moment and a great example of how things that happen in Deep Space Nine episodes matter beyond the end of the episode. That is a callback to an earlier episode. I think it was the Empok Nor episode, where a group from DS9, including Garrick and Nog, go to the other abandoned Cardassian space station in the area to scavenge for parts, and things kind of go haywire and it turns into a horror movie. Things that happen in Deep Space Nine episodes stick. They affect character. They affect future interactions. And something that happened 10 or 15 episodes ago can come back in this episode because it all matters. It's all important. It's one of the things that makes Deep Space Nine such a fantastic show. This one is from Carlyle the Cinephile. One of my favorite moments in the episode where Nog applies to Starfleet Academy is when he's telling Rom and Quark about it, and Rom stands up to Quark for the first time and encourages him to do it. It just tugs at the heartstrings for me. Yeah, that is a fantastic scene, and I referenced it a little bit in the video where I talk about how that scene between Sisko and Nog changes the character arcs for like 3 different characters. It doesn't necessarily change Sisko's character arc, but it changes his attitude toward Ferengi. It changes Nog's character arc because it sends him off on his journey to Starfleet, and it changes Rom because Rom stands up to Quark for the first time, and it starts Rom on the way to eventually leaving Quark's and getting his job as an engineer for the station, which is a payoff to something that Nog tells Sisko. And he says, my father could have been a chief engineer of a starship if he'd had the chance. This one is from Jungs Bodyguard. One thing I always found odd about the Valiant was why Nog didn't automatically assume command. He outranks everybody on this ship. That's Nog's journey through the episode of having that realization, of coming to grips with the fact that he should not be just unquestioningly admiring and following their orders. But when he first arrives on the ship, that's where he's at. And of course, he's flattered when they say, Mr. Nog, you can be the chief engineer. It never occurs to him to say, wait a minute, I'm the only officer here. I'm the captain, dude. I mean, I'll decide which one of you gets to be chief engineer. I'm running this fucking show, okay? The reason he doesn't do that is because he's in awe of Red Squad. And by the end of the episode, he realizes being in awe of Red Squad is the worst thing that they could have done. This next one is from Wellington Smith. I kind of identify with Nog. When I was a teen, I was a real handful. I flunked out of 3 schools, got arrested, stole stuff, and some other, better keep that under my hat kind of things. But with the help of family and community, I got my degree and started a life in public service, which I'm still doing decades later. I love that Star Trek made this character for us to learn from and aspire to. Thank you, Steve, for this remembrance. Well, thank you for sharing that with everybody else, Wellington. That's a really wonderful example of how a fictional character can really affect someone's actual life, you know, or give them someone to relate to be able to say, oh, I love that character, I know that character because I've been in that character's shoes in such a way, you know. That's a really, really terrific thing. And thank you for sharing your remembrance of Nog and for how it impacted you personally. I think that's really, really wonderful. And one more for the Nog video. This one is from Jay Blakely. Steve, Erin Eisenberg talked about the need to be an organ donor. That would be a larger way we could remember Erin is if everybody who could filled out their organ donor cards. Absolutely, I second that, and hopefully me reading it in a video will allow that sentiment to spread a little bit further than it would have just in the comment section. Erin Eisenberg was a two-time, I believe, recipient of organ donations. He had 2 kidney transplants throughout his life. Untold numbers of other people have had extensions of life, improved quality of life because of organ donation. It's a really, really important thing. And yes, if you are able, if you are in a situation health-wise where you are a viable organ donor, please make sure that you are registered as an organ donor. Here in the United States, at least here in Maryland where I live, and I think in most other states, you have a status indicated on your driver's license. So if you have a driver's license, it'll say whether or not you're an organ donor. And if you are not an organ donor, please consider becoming one because it is really, really important. If that situation ever arises where you could potentially be an organ donor, you could literally save not just one person's life, but several people's lives. So yeah, that's a great way to carry on the legacy and to honor Erin Eisenberg. And now here are some comments from my most recent Trek Actually video. This is the one just from last week about the eugenics wars. First up from WD Callahan. I'm glad to finally see a new Trek Actually. Actually, that eugenics wars video was the third Trek Actually video in a row. I've been calling them regulation Trek Actuallys lately, but yeah, the actual proper scripted Steve is trying to make a good video Trek Actually videos. There were 3 of those in a row. There was the progressive, is Star Trek less progressive than you think? There was the special Erin Eisenberg episode, which was a fully scripted, proper episode, and then there was the eugenics wars. 3 in a row. So maybe, are you missing videos? Are you subscribed? Did you click the little bell? This one is from Eddie Yantis. Just wanted to point out that if the original name of the shuttle was the Constitution, then technically our first reusable space vehicle was a Constitution-class ship named Enterprise. Eddie's comment is representative of I don't even know how many people who left similar comments pointing out that because the original space shuttle was to be named the Constitution before it was ultimately named the Enterprise, we could say that it was a Constitution-class ship. And doesn't that sound perfect? This one is from Pixel Girl. Now, this is a story all about how my life got turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became the deposed ruler of a quarter of the planet. Oh boy. Only true 90s kids will understand that reference. This one is from Carlos A. Diaz. Here's a question for you to ponder, Steve. How was Counselor Troi able to get the rank of commander by just passing a test, while Geordi and Data remain lieutenant commanders by the end of the series? She even orders them around. A little off topic for that video, Carlos, but I will let it slide because it's an interesting question, and I think I know the answer. It's never been explicitly laid out and established on camera, I don't think, in any Star Trek show. But from context clues, I think we can assume that a promotion to full commander, which does seem to necessitate taking a test, what they call the bridge officer's test, so that you can attain the rank of full commander, that is kind of a voluntary thing. It's sort of like I love NYPD Blue. It's one of my favorite shows. And at NYPD Blue, you see a couple of the ways they write off characters when characters leave the show is they say, well, this guy who was a detective took the sergeant's test and he got promoted to sergeant, so now he's leaving to go be a sergeant somewhere. Or the lieutenant took the captain's test and now he's a captain, so he's going off somewhere. So maybe it's just that Geordi and Data, for whatever reason, maybe they were comfortable, maybe they liked being lieutenant commanders, maybe they liked their current positions. Like, say, a lot of cops who are detectives like being detectives and don't want to be a lieutenant or a sergeant or a captain, or a lot of cops who are street cops don't want to be a detective, and they're not interested in being promoted. Maybe Geordi and Data figured, hey, we've got our perfect jobs here. We don't want to be promoted. If there is like an avenue to become a full commander, we're just not going to pursue it right now because we're happy where we're at. I think it's probably something like that they just didn't pursue promotion. Here's one from Phil T. Duck. One of my favorite bits of Trek trivia is that the Space Shuttle Enterprise never went to space. Anyway, I've always assumed that the Trek timeline split from our own around 1966, when Trek first premiered. Yeah, and that second bit about how the premiere of Star Trek is when our reality split off from the reality that we see in Star Trek is something that a lot of other people mentioned in the comments as well, that the difference between our real world and the fictional Trek world is that in Star Trek, they didn't have Star Trek. And as for the Enterprise never flying in space, yes, that is absolutely true. The shuttle Enterprise that was named Enterprise after a massive Trekkie letter writing campaign, that was the test vehicle. And it flew, but it only ever flew in the atmosphere, and it basically was used for landing tests. It never flew in space. There was some talk, I believe, after Challenger exploded, there was some talk about retrofitting the Enterprise and making it space-worthy and making it into a full member of the shuttle fleet, but they ultimately decided that it was better to just build a new shuttle from scratch instead, and they built the Endeavour to replace Challenger, and Enterprise never flew in space. But yeah, it is one of those neat little bits of trivia that yes, it was the Enterprise, and it is technically the first space shuttle, but it never flew in space. The first shuttle to actually orbit the Earth, to actually fly in space, go into full service, was the Columbia, which is a detail that Enterprise, the show, picked up and referenced and paid tribute to when we saw that the second NX-class ship, the first NX-class ship that they built after Archer's Enterprise, was called the Columbia. So it's pretty cool. This one is from Steffi Koh, who I thought it was 600 million deaths, referring to, I said in the Eugenics Wars video that the death toll from the Eugenics Wars is said to be about 30 million or so. 600 million is the reported death toll of World War III, which I believe is established in the movie Star Trek First Contact when they travel back in time, and it's a few years after the end of World War III, and Riker's like, well, if I was going to assimilate Earth, this is where I would come right after the last World War, 600 million dead. That's World War III. World War III and the Eugenics Wars are not the same thing. The Eugenics Wars supposedly took place in the 90s. World War III, I think, was sometime in the 2050s is when World War III took place or will take place. Hopefully not, but yeah. So 600 million dead was World War III, not the Eugenics Wars. Here's another one from the Eugenics Wars video from Cameroon Marang. It's easy, Steve. It happens in the not too distant future, next Sunday AD. Oh, you know how to talk to me. You really do. Not just you, Cameroon, but everybody, all you folks who leave these comments making little nerdy references to MST3K or to Quantum Leap or some other show that I've referenced that I like. You know how to talk to me. Even the Fresh Prince. God, I used to watch I am a true 90s kid. I used to watch the Fresh Prince every goddamn week. So the Fresh Prince reference got me from Pixel Girl, and this one from Cameroon Boomerang with an MST3K reference. You get me. I think that's why I think this is such a positive parasocial thing we have going on here, because you just get me, And now we come to some comments about a little challenge I laid down for Star Wars fans after I bragged about how Star Trek fans had gotten a space shuttle named after the Enterprise. I was like, beat that, Star Wars. And a few Star Wars fans took me up on that challenge. I don't really think anybody quite nailed it, but we'll give them a shot. We'll give the Star Wars fans a shot, okay? So this one is from Robert Mills. He says, Star Wars has an official day. Where's Star Trek Day, Shives? LOL. Every day is Star Trek Day. I can't do the crying bit 2 things in a row. I can't. Forget it. We'll just count the first one as the crying bit, and this one, it's just forget I tried to do that. That was bad. I apologize for that. Brad Stevens, SpaceX's Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets are named after the Millennium Falcon. Yeah, and that's close, but SpaceX is a private company, and pretty much any dipshit with a few $1 billion who wants to start a private spaceflight company can name the rockets anything they want. You know, the space shuttle that was legit, okay? That was the government. That was the U.S. government. They were able to cite the U.S. government to prove that Kris Kringle was really Santa Claus, and the Enterprise was a real spaceship because it was named by the government. And that's statism. Here's one from Brian Gowdy. What about Reagan's Star Wars missile defense system? Not as good as calling it the Falcon, but close. Yeah, close, but didn't everybody kind of make fun of Reagan for that? Didn't they kind of like, oh, Ronald Reagan calling it Star Wars? And Star Wars wasn't the official name. People called it Star Wars. It was actually SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. So close, but no, I don't think we can count that. Here's one from Emma MacFarlane. As a Star Wars fan, we have a legally recognized religion in several countries. God damn it, Emma. All right, fine. I'll give you that one. I'll give you that one. The Bajaran religion is not an officially recognized religion anywhere. So yes, you can you can register on your taxes as a Jedi. So there, thank you. There, Emma wins, everybody. Star Wars fans win. They got a religion. Are you happy? Here's one from Secular Scholar. Isn't still bringing up 9/11 just to say you didn't reference it still classless? Well, if it's so classless, Secular Scholar, why do you keep bringing it up, huh? I only brought it up in that video to point out that I didn't bring it. You know, I'm sorry. Emma's got me just so... I'm... with the whole Star Wars religion thing, like that's just, there's something about knowing that Star Wars fans have something over me as a Star Trek fan. I just can't, oh God. I mean, like the overall film quality and box office grosses, like I've learned to live with that. But the religion thing, like I just... I only brought it up so that everybody would know how classy I was for not bringing it up. And I am sorry if you don't understand that. And one more from the Eugenics Wars video from Ronnie Estep. Dude, leave your politics out of your videos. I love Trek and I'm a conservative. Most of the time I enjoy your videos and your take on Trek until you bring in politics. Well, Ronnie, you're watching the wrong YouTube channel. The last couple of responses to comments, I was kind of like pretending to be angry for like hopefully comic effect. But Ronnie, this is okay. You're watching the wrong channel, bud. I'm not gonna, I've said this several times and I'm always happy to say it again because it's like no matter how many times I say it, it seems like there's always a Ronnie. There's always a Ronnie who's going to come in and say, I love your Star Trek videos, but do you have to talk about politics? Because God knows Star Trek never talks about fucking politics, does it, Ronnie? It's my YouTube channel. I'll talk about my politics as much as I want. And if you're a conservative and it bothers you that I shit on your shitty conservative politics in my Star Trek videos and it stops you from enjoying my Star Trek videos, good. That's why I do it so much, Ronnie. Because I don't want you to enjoy my Star Trek videos. If you feel the need to watch some non-political YouTube videos to kind of relax and take a break when you're having a rest in between voting for the people who fuck everything up, watch somebody else's channel. Don't watch my channel, because I'm not here for you, Ronnie. I'm not here for you. And now here are some comments left on my video about how Star Trek may actually be less progressive than you think. This first one is from Jenny, who says, the bit about rape accusations reminds me of The Enemy Within, when Evil Jim tries to rape Janice in her quarters. She then has to accuse Kirk, the most powerful man on the ship, of rape in front of his two best friends, who are the other two most powerful men on the ship. I think sometimes about how brave Janice would have had to have been to be able to do that, and I thought the show didn't give her enough credit for it or explore that in any way. It's also kind of gross considering that Grace Lee Whitney herself said she was assaulted by one of the execs associated with the show. I also remember the episode Retrospect from Voyager, in which the Doctor helps Seven uncover a repressed memory of a man she worked with forcibly removing Borg technology from her body, so a rape metaphor. She tries to get justice, despite a lot of people not really believing her. Then, surprise, it turns out that her memories were faulty, and he never tried to metaphor rape her after all. But now his life has been ruined by her baseless accusations, and he kills himself. So yeah, that one is pretty terrible in my opinion. Yeah, those are both great examples, Jenny. And several people mentioned Retrospect, that Voyager episode. And if I had remembered that episode, I certainly would have made at least a reference to it in that video, because that is a incredibly egregious example of a Star Trek show getting it just absolutely wrong. Like any time any TV show, any kind of art says, I'm going to tell a story about rape, and the angle I'm taking is it's going to be about false rape accusations, which, statistically speaking, are incredibly rare and like not even a thousandth of the problem that actual rape is, right? It's not even close. So if your priorities are, I'm going to tell a story about the dangers of false rape allegations instead of, I'm going to tell a story about how fucked up rape is, or how difficult it is to be a rape survivor, or how shitty we treat rape survivors, or how hard we make it for people who have been raped to report their rapes and be taken seriously. Like, if you're going after the false rape accusation angle instead of all that other shit, it tells me your priorities are pretty out of whack to begin with. And yeah, that Voyager episode is a really terrible example of that. So I'm glad you and a lot of other people brought it up. And the example of Yeoman Janice in the Enemy Within is also a really, really good example of just something that you can see when they were writing the episode. You can tell that, like, people writing the episode, it just never occurred to them. But I really, really wish that it had, because yeah, when you put it in those terms, when you say like she had to accuse the captain of the ship of sexually assaulting her in front of not only the captain, but also the other two senior officers on the ship who also happen to be his best buddies. That is such a lopsided power dynamic and so not the way it should ever be. And yet in that Star Trek episode, that's the way it was. And nobody seemed to even consider that it should be anything different, or that Yeoman Rand was in an utterly impossible situation there. Yeah, that's a great example. Two great examples of when Star Trek at least tries to, in the case of The Enemy Within, touches incidentally on sexual assault, and in the case of Retrospect, just does a whole episode on the issue and gets it terribly, terribly wrong. Here's one from Stuart Smith. What you've said about the episode Outcast is a demonstration of how difficult it can be to make acceptable media with progressive ideals. You could do the best job possible and there'd still be someone who takes offense and will comment how it could be better. You can't win no matter how sincere your attempts. Well, I think that's not the way we ought to be looking at it, Stuart. I mean, you could say that if you want to take it from social justice and look at something like sports, I mean, no matter how many home runs you hit, eventually somebody else is going to hit more. No matter how fast you run the mile, eventually somebody's going to run it faster than you did, so why even try? Like, I don't think it makes sense in that context, and I don't think it makes sense in the context of trying to make the best art that you can possibly make. I think it's important, if you are a storyteller, to try and tell stories that do not promote harmful ideas and do not hurt people. And yes, it is impossible to get it perfect. It's impossible to make a show, to tell a story that does not exhibit some form of ignorance or prejudice that future generations will look at always for all time and go, oh, that was perfect. They got it just right, right? There will always be things, even if it may not even apply in your lifetime. It may not even apply in the lifetime of the artist. Future generations might look back and say, ah, man, they could have done that better. And that's fine. That's the way society is supposed to work. That's a mark of progress. It doesn't mean that we just shouldn't try. It's not a matter of, well, you can't win. You know, it's not about winning. There is no winning. That's where my sports metaphor kind of falls apart. There is no winning in social justice, in progressivism, because there's never an end. Society keeps going, and society will never be perfect. So we always have to work generation after generation, year after year, day after day to improve it. And it will never be as good as it can be. It will never be perfect. But that doesn't mean that the effort to make it better is wasted. Quite the opposite. It means that the effort to make it better is essential. Here's one from Frenchie1138. The one I still struggle to get past is, well, Klingons. Initially played by white actors in what is basically yellowface, they became an intrinsically aggressive and brutal species portrayed mostly by black actors, and when they weren't, they were often portrayed by white actors in what amounts to blackface. What can I say but yikes? Yeah, I agree. That's something that I could have mentioned in that video as well. That is something that, yeah, early Klingons in the original series, it was white people with most of the time with skin that had been darkened with makeup to suggest like, well, they have darker skin. That means, you know, the bad guys have darker skin, you know, like that in and of itself is a troubling message. And then when we got a little bit more into Klingon culture and TNG, like the good part of that was it fleshed them out and it made Klingons less one-dimensional, but it also made a dark-skinned group of people who were sometimes played by black actors and were often played by white actors with, again, artificially darkened skin, playing brutal, violent, aggressive, warmongering people. And yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. It doesn't mean that you can't like Klingons. It doesn't mean that Star Trek is bad and that everybody who was involved in that is a racist or the worst person ever or whatever. But that is an issue, you know, and lots of people have noticed that. Lots of people of all different colors and all different backgrounds who are Star Trek fans have pointed out, you know, the Klingon thing, maybe if we had that to do over again, we could do that a little differently. So yes, you are not the only one to notice that. And I've noticed it as well. And yeah, I probably should have mentioned that in my video because I think it's a completely valid point. Here's one from LourdesToast. To my mind, one of the biggest examples of Star Trek not being as progressive as we would like is the way that Chakotay is handled in Voyager. Chakotay is the first regular Native American character in Star Trek, but the writers penned this aspect of his character as if pre-colonial America was a cultural monolith. Rather than choose and research a specific tribe for Chakotay to come from, his culture is made up of every stereotype of Native Americans you could find on TV and film in the 1990s. Yes, absolutely, and that is something I believe that Robert Beltran, the actor who played Chakotay, noticed and had a problem with, and he often jokes at conventions that he wishes he had taken the flute with him when the show was over. And what he means by the flute is the flute musical cue that they would always play whenever Chakotay was doing something spiritual or something stereotypically like of a Native American culture. There was always like that pan flute theme that would play whenever Chakotay was doing something like that. And he said, I asked him if I could have the flute. And I think that's a great way of pointing at it and saying this was a problem. This should have been better. It's also a shame because, you know, one of the first things you learn as a young writer when you start studying writing in school or going to writers groups or taking creative writing classes is that the universal exists in the specific. So you might think, well, they made Chakotay kind of just a generic Native American. They never attached him to any particular tribe because they wanted him to stand for all Native Americans. But he would have stood for all Native Americans no matter what, because as you point out, he was the first regular character in any Star Trek show who was said to be of Native American ancestry. He was the first one, so he would have stood for them all regardless. It would have been much, much better if they would have decided that he was a member of a particular tribe and tailored his characterization and his expressions of his culture and his knowledge of his history, his personal history, to that. Instead of just saying, he's just generally speaking Native American. If they had tied him to a particular background, a particular tribe, then it would have been much more specific. It would have been much better in terms of the writing and the character, would have been a lot less problematic in terms of stereotypes, and he still would have been able to stand for all Native Americans. It's one of those little tiny tweaks that, oh, looking back years later, you really just wish so hard that they would have done that. Here's one more from the Is Star Trek Less Progressive Than You Think video. It's from Brandon Wayne. Love your videos. This was a bit too opinionated, but everyone misses once in a while. What channel does Brandon think this is? Like, he says he loves my videos, but that one was a little bit too opinionated. Like, when have I ever made a, let's just stick with Star Trek and say, when have I ever made a Star Trek video on this channel that has not been opinionated as fuck? Like, it's all my opinion on stuff. Really, every video period, whether it's a Star Trek video or not, every video period on this channel of mine is opinionated in some way or another. Like, I'm not shy about throwing my opinions out there. But what was it about that video? That video about progressivism in Star Trek that struck Brandon as particularly opinionated or too opinionated, I wonder. And one more comment for this video. This one is from the previous comment response video, actually. It's from James S. Steve, come on, bro. Do you really think The Last Jedi was a great movie? Yeah. And actually, to tie this back in with the Star Wars versus Star Trek fan nonsense I was going on about earlier, like, as a Star Trek fan, right? As a dyed-in-the-wool, born and bred, lifelong lover of Star Trek, kind of pisses me off how great The Last Jedi was. Because The Last Jedi was so goddamn good. It was better than any other Star Wars movie, except, I think, The Empire Strikes Back. And I think it was probably better than any Star Trek movie ever, too, except maybe for Star Trek 2. Star Trek 2 maybe has a chance at being a better movie than Last Jedi was such a great movie, bro. It was a fantastic movie. It was exciting, it was engaging, it had great characters that had great, interesting character arcs, kind of atypical character arcs for Star Wars movies, like Poe and his arc of his conflict with Leia and having to, realize that being like the charge into the rescue hothead is sometimes less important than trusting the people in charge and following orders and knowing when to be a hero and when to pull back and watch and see what happens, and to trust people who have more knowledge and experience than you to know what is the right thing to do. I had that amazing storyline with Finn and Rose. Rose is one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars. No, I love Rose. I love that whole movie. I love all the stuff between Kylo Ren and Rey. I mean, oh God, it's such a great movie. Luke Skywalker's are people who complained about how Luke Skywalker was treated in that movie. Like, have you ever seen a movie? Have you ever seen a Star Wars movie? Do you know who Luke Skywalker is? Have you paid any attention during any of his previous appearances in the series? Like, that was such a satisfying way to come back to him, to bring him back into the franchise. And a great showcase for the character, great showcase for Mark Hamill. It's yes, I really do think it is a great movie. I think it's a great movie. I think it's a great Star Wars movie. I love that it's more overtly political than most other Star Wars films have been, although Star Wars has always been political too, because the heroes are all rebels who are fighting fascism, which is kind of a political thing. But Last Jedi was even more political, with, sort of on its sleeve than previous Star Wars films had been. I loved that. I loved the message of the Force being democratized and the Force being available to everyone. I loved Luke saying the Force does not belong to the Jedi. It does not belong to the Sith. Anyone who has the capacity to manipulate the Force has a right to it. It doesn't belong to any group or any organization or any tradition. I just thought the whole movie was great. I thought it was a wonderful film, and I've said that multiple times in multiple videos. And why would I say it if I didn't mean it? It's my channel. Nobody tells me what to say in these videos. Why would I go out of my way multiple times to gush about The Last Jedi and talk about what a great movie I think it is? Even though I am more of a Star Trek fan than a Star Wars fan, if I didn't really mean it. Yeah, bro, I really mean it. I think it's a great goddamn movie. And if you don't think so, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, but I kind of feel sorry for you because I think you're missing out. It's a really, really terrific movie. And it's a shame that more people don't enjoy it as much as I did. So that's the last comment for this video. Thank you all so much for watching these videos and for leaving comments, and all of you who left comments that I didn't, and obviously I can only pick out a tiny representative sample of the comments I get on all these videos to talk about in these comment response videos, but I appreciate all the comments. I appreciate all the insight, all the arguments, all the questions, all the corrections, all the things that you bring up that I left out of videos that maybe I should have talked about, all of that stuff. I appreciate you so much. I appreciate you paying attention to this and watching, and those of you who support me on Patreon, patreon.com/Steve Shives. I appreciate you so much. Those of you who listen to the Ensign's Log, because if you love this Star Trek shit that I do and you're not listening to the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I do with the much better and funnier Jason Harding. If you don't know Jason, if you haven't watched like his YouTube channel or listened to the podcast, Jason, imagine Jason is like me, only a little older and just way better at everything. Just way funnier, way smarter, an ascended version of me. If you think I'm funny, you've got to think Jason is like twice as funny at least, because he's hilarious. And the Ensign's Log is sort of our baby, sort of our pet project, and we really enjoy doing it, and we love hearing from those of you who listen to it as well. So you can listen to the Ensign's Log. It's linked in the description as well, so check it out. And you know what? This video was so nice to do. It was so nice to just sit down in front of a camera and talk to you folks and respond to your comments and sort of come up with shit off the cuff, because I've just spent the last 6 days sweating and working and grinding over a video, the Halloween special for Steve and Stuffy. A lot of you who watch the Star Trek videos probably don't watch Steve and Stuffy, but Steve and Stuffy are like my favorite videos that I do. And just a couple days ago, I put up the Halloween episode of Steve and Stuffy. It's called Steve and Stuffy's Dimension of Fear. It is a tribute to both the Simpsons Halloween specials, because it has 3 different stories in one episode, and also the Twilight Zone. And it's presented in black and white and kind of grainy and looks like an old I was going for Twilight Zone. It kind of turned out a little bit more like Night of the Living Dead, but I'll take that as well, because that's another favorite of mine. So if you haven't watched the Steve and Stuffy videos, or if you've watched them and you never really got into them, or what, it's just not your thing, check out the Steve and Stuffy Halloween special, because I put a lot of work into it, and I'm very pleased with how it turned out. And I would love for more people to check it out, to see it, then normally see a Steve and Stuffy video. So check it out if that's your thing. I'll put a link to it in the description. But if you don't worry about it. I know Steve and Stuffy isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I love it, and I really enjoyed how the Halloween show turned out. So thank you all so much for watching this, for watching whichever videos of mine that you do watch, whether it's just the Star Trek stuff or anything else. I appreciate you so much. I appreciate your support in every form it takes. Come back next month. Come back before next month. I do videos all the time, but if you're especially looking for the Star Trek stuff, come back in a few more weeks for the next Regulation Trek Actually video, which will be about evolution and how Star Trek gets evolution wrong. So come back for that. That'll be a fun video to do. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.